Hi, I'm Christine. Welcome to part 2 in our video series about choosing neutrals. Today we're looking at the warm coloring groups, so spring and autumn, and we'll group them together, 3 springs and 3 autumns, the same way we did with the 3 summers and the 3 winters in the cool seasons video. Hopefully, by highlighting the main points, what really matters, what the springs and the autumns have in common, it will be easier for you to make great choices when you buy your neutral colors or put together your outfits. In part 1, we talked about the 2 main questions, or the 2 first questions that I ask myself when I'm choosing neutrals for the cool seasons. With the warm seasons, the questions I ask are a little bit different, and I find them easier to apply within the color families. So we're going to look at beige, gray, green, brown individually. We also looked in part 1 at how the colors are the source of the neutrals, what that means, and how the neutrals are basically the same color as would appear in that season's palette, just a less saturated or less pigmented version. And then we have bright spring, which is a little bit unique. It looks to me sometimes more like a winter. The 3 autumns look like they would belong to autumn, but bright spring doesn't always look like a logical extension of a spring. And so we're going to take some time to look at it individually. I was so happy to read in part 1 how you were able to see the differences and the comparisons we were making when we laid the color palettes from 2 seasons directly on fabric for choosing clothes, makeup, jewelry, anything you add to your appearance, footwear, eyeglass frames. Those palettes have magical powers and they unlock in levels. So the color palette is 60 to 90 colors. They are together for a reason. That's what makes the season, because they all have the same properties of color. You don't have to figure this out. That legwork, that math has all been done for you. The palette has it all right there. But it is helpful to know how to use it so that you can find these gorgeous, harmonious colors that look so spectacular on you. In the last few videos, we've been talking about different ways to set up those comparisons, and we're going to practice today with a full spring and a full autumn palette on a neutral color. Images today were made in your style. Links in the description box for shopping information. If you prefer to listen like an audiobook and then follow along with still images, much larger still images, the pictures and the script will be in a blog post on my website at some point this month, and all these links are going to be in the description box below. Question 1 is the same with the warms as it was with the cools. Is the color that you're looking at inside the light to dark range for the season? We saw with the cools, winter goes all the way to the extremes, white to black. Every color, every neutral fits inside there. Summer, it narrows at both ends. It doesn't go all the way to white, doesn't go all the way to black. I think that with the warms, the colors behave a little bit differently. The warm neutrals, the sliders, the brackets, are all the way at the light end, and then the whole range travels together for autumn all the way to the dark end. So if you have a color that is outside, too dark for spring, let's say, then it might be a good contender for autumn. With the cools, with the warms though, as you can see, there's a lot of overlap in the value range, the light to dark range. So if the answer to the question is obvious, then it's useful. If the answer to the question is not obvious, because they have these overlaps in their light to dark ranges, then we got to come along and find other ways of making comparisons. Where are some places that they don't overlap that could be useful to us? Where I live in Canada, I would guess that most warm neutrals in stores or on websites belong to autumn. But that's fine. We don't need to hold out for perfect to make progress. The idea is to being able to find those colors that have enough in common with spring that they would be very good choices. And so in this panel, with others that we're going to see, you might see an item in spring and think, shouldn't that be in autumn? And in every case, I imagine that you'd be quite right. So the question then becomes, well, what's the best choice I can make with the resources I have? How do I know which autumn colors to avoid if I'm a spring or vice versa? And I'm okay with having autumn colors with spring as long as they cooperate with the group. So that's a lot of what this video is going to be about. And also, because we're looking at the 3 autumns and the 3 springs together, there could be colors that don't seem to belong together, like here, belted coat in spring. That might work for a light spring or a bright spring, or one that you would want to just wait and evaluate in person. What kind of things stand out to you as differences between autumn and spring? Spring doesn't get very dark. That brown tank top, that would be near the darkness boundary. Autumn has a darker end point, which we're going to see more of in the panel about brown. For spring, lightness of color improves the odds of it fitting in, working with the group. We can find really similar colors in autumn and spring. For example, green gold. You see it here in spring, lower row, left side, the t-shirt. These left and right, I've tried numbering them, and the numbers, it's too much information on the page. But anyway, we'll do our best. That green gold t-shirt is probably an autumn color. But we could find a very similar color in a spring palette, and the t-shirt holds its own in the spring group. It doesn't look faded or tired or awkward or like a complete outsider. It's not detracting or disrupting. I think it qualifies for a light spring or a true spring closet, and then even better or enhanced if that particular color or a version of it appears in the natural pigmentation of the person, for example, in the eye colors or maybe hair tones. In both autumn and spring, if I just defocus, pull out the lens, I see beige, apricot, yellow, variations of brown, as we saw in the image before, the value ranges image. I see green in the beige, I see green in the gray, and then of course I see green in the olive. Red appears as orange in the peach and brown tones, I think. I don't see like fire engine red or scarlet red. I don't see any blue except a touch in that belted coat, and I don't see purple or red violet. So we know question 1, we've practiced with that one. Is it inside the value range for the season? Question 2 for the cools was, can I see color in it, and can I know or be fairly sure of what that color would be? With the warms, question 2 doesn't apply as well, or I don't use it as well, because you can see color in all the neutrals and you would know what the color is. Looking for warmth doesn't help. They're all warm. True spring warmth is yellow, like buttercup yellow. Autumn warmth is more golden, like lion. But you can't always tell that looking at a fabric or looking at the palette. There are a lot of other variables that would be more useful. And for me, the big one here is going to be the brightness of the color. So if there were a question 2 for warms, would not be, can I see color in it? It would be, is there enough color in it for spring? Brightness of color, the amount of saturation, the amount of pigment, let's say, would be the major difference or dimension, the one with the least overlap between autumn and spring. Spring has more pigment out of the tube relative to the amount of gray. So autumn is more muted, softer, more visible gray relative to the amount of pigment. And I find this much more noticeable and helpful with the neutrals than I actually do with the colors. Compared with spring, I can see gray in all the autumn neutrals. I'd hesitate more if you asked me that question about spring. And I think that spring colors have a brighter effect. It's like they come forward a little bit more. I am much more aware of the color that's in them than I am on the autumn side. Spring side, 3rd row, right side. Can you make out that the blouse has a print? It's ivory and orange stripes. I could see it as a neutral with the gold and the orange, as in a go with everything interpretation, the same as I could silver or pearl with the cool seasons. The top may be bright for a neutral on the page, but how others see it is in combination with whatever else we're wearing and under a person, the face of a person with the same brightness. So the overall effect is balanced. The color contribution isn't significant. And also with this print, it blends together from a social distance, so it just becomes a peachy beige. 4 items in the center column. Those are colors I think could work reasonably well in both groups. One of them probably is autumn, or all of them probably are autumn, but there are enough similarities with both color palettes that we can take advantage of those shared properties. You may see them as more definitely autumn or spring, and that is fine. There's an element of individuality here. Like music, seasons are a kind of a systems thinking. Like music, you feed the notes into a computer with no human there, the same sounds come out. Same with season, you feed the same color dimensions into a computer, the same season comes out. With a solid system, the same person working in the same analysis system anywhere in the world is going to put a person into the same group. And then you add the human who is building their closet, and they bring in interpretation and individuality, and artistry is born. Point being, if you think anything here is off for your closet, then it's an item you leave at the store. Beige is a version of white for the warm seasons. We've seen whites also in 2 other videos, True Autumn Neutrals and Your Best Black and White, parts 1 and 2. I'll put links below. With cools, can I see color in it? Do I know what color it would be? That's often enough to start moving into the specific seasons comparisons. You know already, is it likely to be winter or summer? Not so easy with the warms. Question 2 from the last image, is there enough color for spring? Can be very useful. The limitation with these colors is that they're beige and white. They're light. They never have a lot of pigment. New question for the warms. Question 3, is there too much red for spring? In spring, on the spring side, I can sense the yellow reflecting out. In autumn, the gold doesn't register, maybe because gold is more muted than yellow, and it may register for you. What I see is more green in autumn. To give autumn its darkness, a color that is inherently dark is added to the pot. Could be red, brown, black, probably not blue. That would cool it off, and we're looking at warm seasons. And the amount of red, brown, black would be tiny. It would be very, very small. But you can see, for example, the 2 darker coats on the autumn side, you feel the red in them that you don't necessarily see on the spring side. And don't be concerned if you don't find an exact match in your color palette, particularly with beige and white. There's so many differences and variations that I actually expect slight differences. I would never expect 2 palettes of the same season to look identical. Think in terms of whether the colors could work with the whole season or with the entire lightest neutral strip in your palette when you're testing fabric, rather than how well a fabric would match a single swatch. And sometimes I'll even hide the light neutral strip and just see how well the fabric color works with the entire season and without being distracted about there not being an exact match. Spring side, the 2 coats lower down, almost certainly autumn. I just assume, right? I don't know if it is or it's not. I don't see these items in person. I just assume I see beige, I think autumn. But the colors are light, and there is enough shared or compatible warmth in spring. I think that they work very well within the group and would work very well with a spring-colored person. Center row. Once again, it shows colors that are likely autumn. I'm going to stop saying it shortly. Might get along in both groups. The 3rd item, sleeveless top, too muted for spring, but maybe it could be a neutral light beige for a spring, a layering item. Sometimes autumn colors can act as spring neutrals. 4th item, the coat, quite okay for light spring, whatever season it might be. Now we're on to gray. Flyover impression, first thing I think, I don't see any blue. Second thing, autumn grays are darker, although some are light, but the slider goes to a darker end point. They're warmed by gold. It's not obvious. In fact, I find the overall effect is usually greenish. Spring grays are greenish too, but it's yellow-green, and they're lighter. Basic spring property to be lighter. But all of that does not help me recognize them when I'm shopping. It was better with beige, actually. The gray handbag here on the right side, spring, that could be bright spring because it has this metallic or steely look. What I mean when I say that it doesn't really look like a rational extension of spring, the way that the autumns all look similar to one another. Bright gray or clear gray, I mean for spring, colors are bright or clear. It sounds kind of oxymoronic, like all grays are soft in the sense of having less pigment. And basic spring guidelines, I think of light and bright as helping to direct me to spring, and also that yellow-green impression. Could be sage green, but there's yellow and white mixed in to help light reflect out that you don't see in the autumn grays. They don't have that brightness quality. It's a softer gray, like sunflower seeds, a grayer gray maybe. As you may know from our videos, visuals help me. They help me when I'm shopping. It doesn't help me to think muted and dark, whatever. It helps me to think sunflower seeds, look for sunflower seeds. And so here comes one of my analogies. Get ready, I've never shared this one in public. Autumn grays remind me of medium to well done steak. There you go. Just helps me picture a mixture of red and gray together. The red in autumn that spring does not have can give it its density and some of its darkness. Those two handbags on the autumn side, I'll call those taupe. I would call them, well, medium to well done steak. This is what I'm looking for in a store. And as always, I welcome your suggestions and analogies because they're so good. Center column, as with beige, colors that I could slide left and right. They have enough in common, I think, to work with the group. If we got specific, probably autumn, but lightness and not too much red helps them to sit at spring's table. V-neck sweater, top of spring, could also belong in that center column. Green is next. So what comes to mind? Well, same as what we've said before, there is sort of a theme developing here that works for every color family. Spring is lighter and brighter. It's a whole different time of day. Compare the polo shirt, bottom of autumn, and the high boot in spring, both green gold, but the autumn version is softer, if not darker. Top of spring, dark green handbag. There's a similar version over in autumn in the suede pouch. But in spring, it is at or near the darkness limit. Autumn would get darker. And even as a darker color, spring is brighter, both in the sense of more pigment and more light reflecting outwards. On the spring side, you see the light shiny handbag under the coat. For bright spring, well, that's probably more of a beige than a green. But you see similar green-gold tones within all these items. Their compatibility with spring colors. So it's a visual for how the colors are the source of the neutrals. With autumn, we notice more red in the grays. Same applies here. I see it in both khaki, sweater and shirt at the top of autumn left side, and I see red in the green-gold top of autumn right side. Let's compare two other handbags. Autumn, second from the top on the right. Spring, at the bottom, just beside the boot. Try out our questions. Let's see if that autumn bag could work for spring. Is it in the value range for spring? Yep. Are there similar colors in the spring palette? Yeah. Is there enough pigment for spring? Like, is it as green gold as the spring bag next to the boot is? Actually, no. The autumn bag is grayer than the closest color in the spring palette or the spring bag. Next question. Is it too red for spring? I think it is. Compared with the bag on the spring side, that one will get along better in a spring wardrobe, even if it is technically an autumn color. Center row, 3 items, can go on either side. Green gold t-shirt, we saw that before in panel number 1. The shiny bag, the shimmered jacket, well, they definitely have enough pigment for spring. There'd be a similar color in the palettes might be with the neutrals in spring and the colors in autumn, but there's some compatibility here. They might not go with everything in a spring wardrobe, but they would go with a lot of things. Spring side, green trench coat for light spring. That's a nice textile. Brightens it from an autumn level. Bag below, that could be bright spring, green gold and bright. Don't sense muting as gray or muting as gray with orange. Smooth shine, light reflection. It's actually really good for a winter blend season, which bright spring is. You see the V-neck sweater next to the polo, lower row of autumn. Fairly high pigment compared with the polo, so it would be in one of the more saturated autumns. You could definitely find colors like that in spring, but I think it'd be too red for spring. So dark autumn could be a good contender for that, plus they would do really well with the texture. Whereas with spring, I'd worry that this red would flush the face with red or completely overpower the skin tones. Bright spring has darker green golds, but they're still not as red as autumn, similar colors. And I would have the same concern about flushing the skin tones with red. Now we're looking at brown. You'd think it'd be so easy with warm seasons. I mean, there's mountains of it, but I think autumn has the bigger mountain. And for drape collections or the neutrals and fabric sets that clients buy from the website, those colors are in season. But for assembling a great closet, including my own, the close enough is plenty good enough theme goes on. The question, is it too red for spring? Well, now that one doesn't apply really to brown, because brown is like dark orange and orange is made with yellow and red. So many spring browns are reddish, like clear amber or maple syrup. Autumn browns, they are more muted, they have less pigment, and like spring, there are reddish browns and there are greenish browns. So that distinction is not going to help us so much with brown. Light and shine are still spring. The bag on the spring side has this candy quality, smooth glassy surface, you know, like the top of a creme brulee. Shiny leather top below is the same idea. Watch below that goes a step further because it has a light shiny metal and a light pearly shiny face. Sheerness, end of the spring group and also the middle of the center row, same idea again. Light moves through and it gives a lighter, lightweight, lifted impression. Works well for spring. Plastic has that same smooth shine that spring finds effortless. Here are the eyeglasses. On the autumn, tortoiseshell, classic look, but using a darker brown and a darker, richer, redder gold than in spring. Clothing items, same, you're on to this now. The autumn sweater is darker, richer, deeper, and redder than the spring coat. The metals on the bags in autumn compared with the spring side watch face or watch, same idea. Spring side, these items would be at the darkness limit, possibly a little bit past it, depending on the palette you have. There are business or expansion palettes that may show darker colors. The scoop neck sweater, spring side, I like it because I see this yellow light reflecting out. It's probably autumn gold, but the sheen lightens it, and so it gives a yellow effect that spring can find a home for. The darker browns on the autumn side, the two bags, cowl neck sweater at the bottom, all darker than spring, and there's a greenish cast in the brown. Also, overall, we see more texture in autumn. Leather weave, wool, chain, saddle, suede buckle. Anyone can do them, but they really come naturally to autumn. So now we're on to bright spring. Neutrals, they can seem unrelated to the season or to each other in the beginning. I really appreciate the challenge of neutrals with this season. I had the same experience. They're not colors I would come up with if someone else hadn't, you know? We know that the colors are the source of the neutrals, and it would work entirely if you took a bright spring color and gray it out, desaturate it enough to the saturation level of neutrals in this season. You would find the particular shades, it's just not very intuitive. First impression for me, winter's here. That white to black span and no obvious color, that just looks winterish. Bright spring's a neutral season, warm and cool parent groups, true spring and true winter. And like all 8 neutral seasons, they have warm, neutral, and cool versions of every color and every neutral. This is the cooler side of the neutrals, maybe even a little past. Lower row, that coat, that one could possibly belong with winter because we see more yellow and green in the colors around it. And I kind of added it here because without it, you don't even recognize the yellow and the green so much. It just all looks gray, but this way you can perceive the differences. And then our next slide is going to show even warmer neutrals. But that coat, I could see a bright spring wearing that. What colors do you not see? Red, pink taupe, violet, blue. They also could qualify as icy because they're very light and clear. They're not muted. They are gray, but they're not soft particularly. Reading the rows left to right, those kind of look like a strip in the palette. Nice to see them in various textures and styles and still focus on whether the sequence holds together because that's how a wardrobe works. You can pair different kinds of items and yet the colors all still work together. We're going to look at Bright Spring Black for 1 second with a palette on it. The 5 seasons with winter influence, 3 winters, dark autumn, and bright spring, have a version of black. And if you line them up side by side, differences would be really quite visible. Bright Spring Black maybe is a step back from maximum darkness of pitch black. The reflection of the black is yellow-green or maybe black-brown, but it won't have red or purple tones or an orange cast the way autumn does. It helps a lot when the quality of the fabric is light in weight compared, let's say, with twill or heavy cotton or velvet. And you see light moving across the fabric. You can see that in the lower half of the image. It's like a gradient of light moving across. Easier to imagine the color in lycra, taffeta, satin. I mean, it could appear in any textile. All colors can these days. But lightweight fabric and reflectivity of light create an airborne effect that works well with spring. The colors look brilliant and true. The black is holding its own. It is an active participant in this presentation. So the palette is the face. The black is the color appearing right beneath the face that the person's wearing. And this black, it's not overwhelming the colors. They're not sinking into it or fading or drowning in it. The black's not coming up between the arms of the palette. I call this, she can keep the color under her face, but the black is an active, it has an active role in this impression. These are the warmer side neutrals, ivory, green gold, browns for bright spring. I stacked them up vertically just to see if it reads any differently, but no. I get the same sense of the lines holding together, and overall I do see the yellow-green cast without the red of autumn. First stack, clear ivory, banana, cream white jeans. Bag at the bottom, we saw that before in panel 4 on green. A good fit here too as a beige. Good metal elements, very shiny. Shine works for spring, which is why highlight looks so good in makeup compared with contour and low light effects that are so perfect for autumn, both the skin tone and the fabrics that they wear. On a bright spring, those yellowy green colors still in the first stack, they look like what they are, or some variation of white. On anyone else, like say me for example, there is a really distinct sharp lemon lime effect. It's a little bit cartoon, even totally separate from the person or anything they're wearing. On a bright spring, that white bag at the top looks white. Center row, possibly all autumn, but workable I think. That shoe, second one down, brings to mind the green-gray jacket Ryan Reynolds was wearing in our blending in, showing up, showing off video. I'll put the link below. And then the stack on the right, the bag at the top, peachy beige, lightness, good buckles for spring, clear light shiny gold. I don't see any kind of camel for this group. This might be the closest. Top below, that's what I mean by metallic olive or metallic khaki. And it doesn't have to be a blouse. It can be a backpack. It can be an excellent casual pant or a shoe if you want to take out the shine. And then the two coats, examples of darker browns. There's some red there, but not the teddy bear or chocolate brown of autumn. We're going to do one of our practical demos. We have the two True Warm palettes, True Autumn, True Spring, on the same gray-green fabric. And we're going to think through our questions. Comparing them will be easier in the blog post. I'll stack them one on top of the other. Here, we'll go through one, then we'll go through the other. Is the fabric within the value range for the seasons? Yes to both. It's not too light or dark for the season limits, both autumn and spring. Is there a similar color in the palette? Yes to both. Is there too much pigment in the fabric for autumn or not enough for spring? Not enough for spring. The most similar color, let's say the third strip starting from the whites in spring, it's way more pigmented than the fabric is. And if you look at all the colors, the other colors, those blues and purples, they look really bright. If you wore the fabric and one of those blues and purples in an outfit, everybody'd be looking at the blue or the purple. Even the light neutrals for spring, the ivory, the beige tones, they're too bright for the fabric. Too bright, they have too much pigment, but it's like they jump up off the fabric. We want our attention evenly divided between us and what we're wearing. In the spring palette, it's like it's sparkling. It's hovering, floating up above the fabric. Like if you were standing in one of the swatches and you took a step off, you'd fall off this cliff to get to the fabric. And keep going around that palette. Look at everything, not just the closest match. The light greens and the turquoise colors in spring, that just make no sense at all. In autumn, there's more balance. There's more equality. You don't feel one jumping off the other. Attention evenly divided between the fabric and all the colors in the palette. So the energy kind of feels more balanced. The fabric is just under the palette. We're not unaware of it. It's like a blouse under a face. You want to know what the other person's wearing. You don't want it to be completely ignored, and you don't want it to jump in front of them either. So here, the fabric, it's just beneath the face, the palette, not so far that we ignore it. And there are no colors in the autumn group that we think, these are just nonsense together. Most similar swatch in autumn, same position, so third strip from the whites near the end. It actually looks closer match in terms of how much color pigment is in the swatch and in the fabric than it did with spring. Like if they were stepping stones across the river, they'd be more similar height. You may look at the True Autumn palette and think, well, some of those colors still look really bright. Oh yeah, absolutely. It could be photographic. It can be the ink on canvas, the palette, brightens unevenly with the photograph. Definitely happens. Or maybe the fabric is actually a softer kind of autumn. So it is autumn, not spring, but we maybe are looking for a soft autumn, not a true autumn. But overall, I'm on the autumn side with this fabric. It looks to me more rational and compatible than spring did. You may try this harmonizing exercise and think the palette and the fabric, they're changing one another. The colors look one way apart and they look another way when you put one on top of the other. That's normal. All colors change one another. The idea is to decide if the change is either so obvious or extreme or awkward or unhealthy that you could not wear these two things together and you're probably looking for another season. As we said, I completely expect to see differences in the colors between the same season, different palettes. That's perfectly fine. The idea then is to use all those other colors as part of the decision of whether the fabric would work in that season. Thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you found some new ideas or ways of thinking about color that maybe even displaced some old ways of thinking about color. I hope that you ask lots of questions. They're my favorite part. And if you disagree with me on anything, I really hope that you tell me that or share that with us, because I love seeing all this through your eyes. So once again, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.